Ever wondered why some cartoons vanished from history? The 1970s wasn't just disco and bell-bottoms. It was the wildest era of animation censorship America ever saw. While kids were watching Saturday morning cartoons, underground animators were creating films so controversial that theaters refused to show them, and parents' groups demanded they be burned. Let's explore the forbidden animated treasures you can finally experience today. 1. Fritz the Cat, 1972. The first X-rated cartoon in American history blew the doors off animation forever. Based on Robert Crumb's underground comic, director Ralph Bakshi turned a simple cat into the most controversial animated character of all time. Fritz wasn't just pushing boundaries, he was obliterating them with a sledgehammer while authorities scrambled to stop him. The film followed a college-age feline exploring America's counterculture, from Greenwich Village to Harlem, encountering everything from drug use to racial tension to free love. Theaters across conservative America flat out refused to screen it. In the Bible Belt, projectionists were threatened with arrest if they showed a single frame. Some countries banned it outright, including Finland and Italy, while others demanded extensive cuts before allowing limited screenings. The wildest part? Creator Robert Crumb hated the adaptation so much, he literally killed off Fritz in his next comic, drawing the cat being stabbed to death with an ice pick. Talk about creative differences. Despite Crumb's disapproval, the film grossed over $25 million on a tiny $850,000 budget, making it the most successful independent animated film of its time. Critics were divided like never before. The New York Times called it a landmark in animation, while others labeled it cinematic garbage. But animation historians now recognize Fritz as the film that shattered the Disney monopoly on feature animation and proved cartoons could tackle serious adult themes. Love it or hate it, Fritz changed animation forever, opening the floodgates for mature animated content that we take for granted today. 2. Coonskin, 1975. Ralph Bakshi struck again with what might be the most misunderstood animated film ever made. Initially protested as the most racist cartoon in history, Coonskin was actually a blistering satire attacking racial stereotypes, not promoting them. The film was so misinterpreted that the Congress of Racial Equality picketed its premiere, forcing Paramount Pictures to drop it entirely. Featuring characters like Brother Rabbit, Brother Bear, and Preacher Fox, the film reimagined Uncle Remus tales in a contemporary urban setting, using harsh imagery to critique American racism. During its troubled release, theater owners received death threats, screenings were disrupted by protesters, and the film was effectively blacklisted from major distribution channels. Most Americans never got to see it. Behind the scenes, Bakshi faced constant studio interference. Executives wanted him to tone down the social commentary, but he refused to compromise his vision. They wanted a black Bugs Bunny, and I gave them the truth, Bakshi later said. The film vanished from circulation for decades, becoming an underground legend passed around on bootleg VHS tapes. The ultimate irony? Years later, prominent black filmmakers, including Spike Lee, praised Coonskin as a misunderstood masterpiece. Critics who revisited it recognized that Bakshi wasn't promoting stereotypes, but exploding them to expose America's racist underbelly. The film that was once deemed too offensive for theaters is now studied in film schools as a landmark of political animation. Watching it today reveals a raw, fearless critique of American racial politics that feels shockingly relevant nearly 5 decades later. 3. Belladonna of Sadness, 1973. Japan's most visually stunning band animation looks like a moving watercolor painting from your wildest fever dreams. This psychedelic masterpiece from director Eiichi Yamamoto was the final entry in the adult-oriented Animorama trilogy. And boy, did it go out with a bang. Theaters were so terrified of its content that the film bombed catastrophically, bankrupting the legendary Mushi production studio. Loosely based on Jules Michelet's book Satanism and Witchcraft, Belladonna follows a peasant woman who makes a deal with the devil after being assaulted by a feudal lord on her wedding night. The film unfolds like a medieval tapestry come to life, with flowing watercolors, surreal transformations, and European art influences from Gustav Klimt to Aubrey Beardsley. The original version was so graphic that censors in multiple countries demanded massive cuts. In Japan alone, nearly 8 minutes were sliced out. The film then disappeared for decades, becoming a whispered legend among animation buffs. When it finally resurfaced for a 4K restoration in 2016, audiences discovered not just a controversial curiosity, but a legitimate artistic masterpiece. Critics now consider it one of the most visually innovative animations ever created. Its unconventional technique of using mostly still images with limited animation created a dreamlike quality decades ahead of its time. Film scholar Susan Napier called it one of the great forgotten masterpieces of world animation. The film that once destroyed a studio is now celebrated for its feminist themes and artistic vision, proving yet again that today's banned content often becomes tomorrow's classic. Just don't watch it with your grandparents. 4. Heavy Traffic, 1973. Ever wonder what would happen if you mixed live action with animation and then poured gasoline on society's open wounds? Ralph Bakshi's follow-up to Fritz the Cat was so raw that even with an X rating, theaters were terrified to show it. Heavy Traffic follows a young cartoonist navigating a grotesque vision of New York filled with violence, corruption, and cultural conflict. The film was essentially Bakshi's middle finger to American society. Unlike most animations, Heavy Traffic didn't bother with cute characters or happy endings. It hit viewers with a sledgehammer of reality, exploring racism, domestic abuse, and urban decay through the eyes of Michael, a confused artist caught between his Italian father and Jewish mother. The film's groundbreaking mixture of animation with live-action bookends created a surreal, dreamlike quality that made its harsh content even more disturbing. Censors went ballistic. Many theaters refused to screen it despite its adults-only rating. In the United Kingdom, the film was banned outright until heavy cuts were made. Even then, it was restricted to specialized cinemas in major cities. Most Americans never had a chance to see it during its original run. Martin Scorsese later called Heavy Traffic one of the greatest American films of all time, recognizing how it captured New York's gritty 1970s reality better than many live-action films. Animation historian Charles Solomon noted that Bakshi did for animation what Bob Dylan did for folk music. The film that was once too hot for theaters is now recognized as a pioneering work that expanded animation's boundaries, proving cartoons could tackle serious social issues with unflinching honesty. If you want to see the moment animation grew up, Heavy Traffic is required viewing. 5. Fantastic Planet, 1973. This Franco-Czech animated fever dream was so mind-bending that Soviet bloc countries banned it immediately, recognizing its alien oppression story as a thinly veiled critique of communist rule. Director René Laloux created a surreal world where giant blue aliens keep humans as pets or pests, using paper cutout animation that looks like Salvador Dali designed a children's book while hallucinating. The film follows Ter, a human who escapes captivity and joins a rebel group fighting against the Drogs, enormous blue beings who sometimes crush humans for fun. Behind its sci-fi veneer, the film was a bold political statement about Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia. The strange blue aliens represented Russian oppressors, while the tiny humans symbolized the Czech resistance. This metaphor was so obvious that Warsaw Pact nations refused to screen it. Production was a nightmare of political tension. The film was made during the aftermath of the Prague Spring, when Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia. The animation team had to work under threat of government shutdown. Some sequences were smuggled out of the country to ensure they wouldn't be destroyed in a raid. Critics who managed to see it were stunned by its visual imagination. Roger Ebert called it a vision that exists entirely on its own terms, while others dismissed it as hippie nonsense. The film won the Grand Prix at the 1973 Cannes Film Festival, despite being too weird and politically dangerous for mainstream audiences. Today, Fantastic Planet is recognized as one of the most influential animated films ever made, inspiring everything from Adult Swim to Björk music videos. What was once banned as political subversion is now celebrated as revolutionary art that proved animation could tackle complex philosophical ideas while being trippy as heck. 6. Watership Down, 1978. Nothing says childhood trauma quite like cute rabbits graphically tearing each other apart. Martin Rosen's adaptation of Richard Adams's novel was marketed to children, but delivered a brutal allegory that sent kids screaming from theaters. Parents were so outraged by the film's violence that they demanded refunds, filed complaints, and in some regions, successfully lobbied for the film to be pulled from cinemas. The story follows a group of rabbits searching for a new home after one has a vision of their warren being destroyed. What sounds like a sweet animal adventure quickly descends into a nightmare featuring blood-soaked rabbit fights, graphic death scenes, and disturbing visions, including a field literally flooding with blood. The film didn't pull punches with its portrayal of nature's brutality or its political themes about totalitarianism. The UK gave it a U rating, meaning suitable for all, which remains one of the most baffling decisions in British film classification history. In Australia and other countries, outraged parents forced local theaters to stop showing it. Director Martin Rosen received death threats from parents whose children were traumatized. "I never intended to terrify children," Rosen later claimed, "but I refused to water down the book's message." Critics recognized its artistic merit even while acknowledging its frightening power. Animator and film historian Michael Barrier called it, "perhaps the most uncompromising animated feature ever made." Today, Watership Down has earned cult status as the film that scared an entire generation of kids, with adults still discussing the childhood trauma it inflicted. What was once condemned for being too intense is now celebrated for respecting children's intelligence enough to show them that the world can be a dangerous place. 7. Allegro Non Troppo, 1976. Italian director Bruno Bozzetto looked at Disney's Fantasia and thought, "Nice, but where's the existential dread and political commentary?" His answer was Allegro Non Troppo, a satirical masterpiece that was promptly banned in several countries for mocking both Disney and authoritarian governments. Franco's Spain prohibited it outright, while other nations demanded cuts to its more provocative sequences. The film presents animated segments set to classical music, just like Fantasia, but replaces Disney's optimism with dark comedy and social critique. One famous sequence set to Ravel's Bolero shows evolution beginning from a Coca-Cola bottle, ending with humanity marching towards self-destruction. Another features an elderly cat remembering the home that has been demolished for urban development, creating one of animation's most heartbreaking commentaries on aging and loss. What made censors particularly uncomfortable was the film's mockery of authority figures. Live-action segments between animations show a tyrannical orchestra conductor abusing his musicians, a not-so-subtle critique of fascism that hit too close to home in countries with recent dictatorial pasts. Disney wasn't amused either, threatening legal action over the parody. Film critics who could see beyond the controversy recognized its brilliance. The New York Times called it a wonderful, wicked, occasionally profound parody, while European reviewers praised its technical innovation. Animation scholars now rank it among the most important animated features ever made, celebrating how it subverted audience expectations about what cartoons could express. The film that was once banned for its irreverence is now studied as a pioneering work that proved animation could deliver sophisticated social commentary wrapped in stunning artistry. 8. Wizards, 1977. Ralph Bakshi strikes again with the post-apocalyptic fantasy that 20th Century Fox executives tried to bury. Marketed as family-friendly fare, Wizards shocked audiences with its dark themes, Nazi imagery, and rotoscoped war footage. When executives saw the final cut, they practically had heart attacks, slashing the marketing budget and limiting its release to just a handful of theaters. Set 10,000 years after a nuclear holocaust, the film depicts a battle between two wizard brothers, Avatar, representing magic and nature, and Black Wolf, representing technology and fascism. Bakshi's most controversial creative decision was incorporating actual Nazi propaganda footage into the animation, creating disturbing scenes where fantasy characters march alongside real Third Reich soldiers. This technique outraged Jewish organizations and war veterans, who demanded the film be withdrawn. The troubled production nearly ruined Bakshi financially. Fox originally promised a $2 million budget, then cut it to just over $1 million midway through. Bakshi had to mortgage his house to complete the film. "They wanted a nice little fairy tale," Bakshi later said, "and I gave them a warning about fascism wrapped in a fantasy package." Despite the studio's attempts to bury it, Wizards developed a passionate cult following. Renowned film critic Leonard Maltin called it a fascinating mixture of message and medium while acknowledging its flaws. The film's innovative use of rotoscoping and mixed media techniques influenced generations of animators, from Don Bluth to the creators of heavy metal. What Fox tried to hide from audiences has become a celebrated cult classic that demonstrated how animation could address serious historical atrocities within fantasy frameworks. Just don't expect Disney magic from this wizard tale. 9. The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat, 1974. How do you make a sequel to a controversial film when the original creator wants nothing to do with it and the original director has moved on? Producer Steve Krantz answered that question with this bizarre follow-up that was banned in even more countries than its predecessor. Without Ralph Bakshi or Robert Crumb involved, this unauthorized continuation managed to be even more offensive than the original. The plot, if you can call it that, follows Fritz through 9 different fantasy scenarios as he lies in a drug-induced coma after being stabbed by his girlfriend. Each life takes him through increasingly absurd situations, from a journey to Nazi Germany to an encounter with aliens. The film's fragmented structure made it even more controversial than the original, as censors couldn't follow its dream logic but recognized its provocative imagery. Countries including Australia, Norway, and Switzerland banned it outright. American theaters were equally hesitant, with many chains refusing to screen it despite its commercial potential. The film managed to gross only $1.5 million compared to the original's $25 million, becoming one of animation's most prominent commercial failures. Critics were merciless. Roger Ebert gave it 0 stars, calling it a series of random drug fantasies. Animation historians now view it as a fascinating failure that demonstrates what happens when controversy is prioritized over storytelling. Despite its reputation, the film has earned recognition for its experimental structure and psychedelic animation techniques. 9 Lives remains a cautionary tale about the difference between genuine artistic boundary pushing and simple provocation. It's the animated equivalent of a bad trip that you can't quite look away from. 10. Tarzoon, Shame of the Jungle, 1975. The French-Belgian animated film so outrageous that U.S. customs officials initially refused to allow Prince into the country. Peach's merciless parody of Tarzan legend turned the jungle hero into Tarzoon, a bumbling fool navigating a jungle filled with anatomically exaggerated creatures. Edgar Rice Burroughs' estate immediately sued, forcing a title change and extensive edits before American distribution could even be considered. The film follows the adventures of Tarzoon as he attempts to rescue his mate June from the villainous Queen Bazanga and her army of penis-shaped creatures. Yes, you read that correctly. The original French version featured explicit imagery that makes Ralph Bakshi look tame by comparison. When it was finally imported to America, the film had to be heavily censored, with over 15 minutes cut from its runtime. Even with these cuts, the film caused international incidents. In the Middle East, theaters showing it were vandalized by religious protesters. In Britain, moral guardians managed to get it banned from major cinema chains. The American dub, featuring the voices of Johnny Carson's Tonight Show regulars, including Bill Murray and John Belushi, became the subject of obscenity hearings in several states. Critics were divided between those who saw it as juvenile trash and others who recognized its satirical merits. The Village Voice praised its anarchic spirit, while mainstream reviewers condemned it as animation at its most degenerate. Animation historians now view Tarzoon as an important, if crude, example of adult animation developing outside American influence. The film that customs officials tried to keep out of America is now recognized for pushing animation into taboo territory and challenging the notion that cartoons must be family-friendly. Just don't expect subtle humor from this jungle adventure. 11. Down and Dirty Duck, 1974. Originally titled Cheap, this animated disaster lives up to both names. Producer Roger Corman thought he could cash in on the adult animation trend with this barely coherent tale of a duck having bizarre adventures. The film was so bad that Paramount Pictures canceled its distribution deal after executives actually watched it. effectively banning it from mainstream theaters. The plot, such as it is, follows Willard, an office worker who encounters an anthropomorphic duck that leads him through a series of absurd scenarios involving bikers, celebrities, and various misadventures. The film's animation quality is notoriously poor, with limited movement and sloppy line work that makes even low-budget Saturday morning cartoons look sophisticated by comparison. What really killed its distribution was the combination of awful quality with extremely mature content. The few theaters that did screen it often found themselves facing local obscenity charges. In Chicago, a theater owner was actually arrested for showing it. The film was pulled from circulation so quickly that many movie guides from the 1970s don't even mention it. Critics who saw it were merciless. Variety called it the nadir of adult animation, while The Hollywood Reporter suggested it might set animation back decades. Even Richard Corliss, known for championing animation as a serious art form, called it an embarrassment to the medium. The film's one saving grace was its soundtrack by Flo and Eddie of the Turtles, which is better remembered than the movie itself. Down and Dirty Duck earned its place in animation history as the film that effectively killed the first wave of adult animation in America. Studios saw its commercial failure as proof that the adult animation trend was over, leading to a drought of mature animated content that lasted until the rise of shows like The Simpsons years later. Sometimes films are banned not because they're too provocative, but because they're too terrible. 12. Shinbone Alley, 1971. Broadway musicals rarely translate well to animation, but Shinbone Alley took adaptation failure to new heights. Based on the stage musical about a cockroach named Archie and a cat named Mehitabel, this bizarre production featured the voice of Carol Channing as a feline with questionable morals. Family theaters refused to book it when they discovered its mature themes, effectively banning it from mainstream circulation. The story follows Archie, a poet reincarnated as a cockroach who falls in love with Mehitabel, an alley cat with multiple husbands and a philosophy of living for today. The film touches on themes of mortality, reincarnation, and loose living that censors deemed inappropriate for animation. Parents expecting talking animal cuteness instead got existential musings, and a cat character whose romantic adventures pushed boundaries. Production was plagued with financial problems. The animation studio ran out of money multiple times, resulting in wildly inconsistent quality from scene to scene. Some sequences feature detailed character animation, while others look like barely moving sketches. The film's original distributor backed out after seeing the finished product, leaving it without proper theatrical distribution. Critics recognized its ambitious failings. The New York Times called it a noble experiment that doesn't quite work, while animation historians note it as one of the earliest attempts to bring Broadway sensibilities to feature animation. Despite its troubled release, Shinbone Alley has earned respect for attempting sophisticated themes years before audiences were ready. The film that theaters wouldn't show to families is now appreciated as an early attempt to elevate animation beyond children's entertainment, proving that sometimes being ahead of your time is indistinguishable from commercial failure. 13. Hey Good Lookin', 1982. The animated film so controversial that Warner Brothers shelved it for 7 years. Though technically released in 1982, Ralph Bakshi completed this film in 1975. But studio executives were so horrified by what they saw that they refused to release it. Instead, they demanded Bakshi remake it, turning what was originally a groundbreaking blend of animation and live action into a fully animated feature that finally limped into limited release nearly a decade later. Set in Brooklyn during the 1950s, the film follows Vinny, the leader of a gang called the Stompers, and his best friend, Crazy Shapiro, through a night of romance, violence, and racial tension. The original version featured real actors composited with animated characters, creating a jarring visual style that Warner Brothers feared would alienate audiences. When they finally allowed a release, it was so limited that most Americans never knew it existed. The film's troubled history is legendary in animation circles. Warner Brothers originally gave Bakshi a $1.5 million budget, then demanded extensive changes. Rather than modify his vision, Bakshi spent an additional $2 million completely reanimating the film. the studio was still unhappy with the result, leading to years of legal battles before its eventual release. Critics who saw the final version were perplexed. Janet Maslin of the New York Times noted it was either a brilliantly original vision or a terrible mess. Animation historians now view Hey Good Lookin' as a fascinating glimpse of what could have been with the original version, considered a lost masterpiece of experimental animation. Bootleg copies of the original cut have circulated among collectors for years, becoming animation's equivalent of a forbidden text. What Warner Brothers tried to bury has become one of animation's most intriguing what-if stories. From experimental art films to counterculture statements, these animated rebels change what cartoons could be, even as they were hidden from view. Which of these banned classics shocked you the most? Or have you seen one that deserved its censorship? The animation industry still grapples with the boundaries these pioneers pushed. Would today's streaming services have the courage to release films this provocative? Or has animation actually become more conservative despite our supposedly more open society? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more hidden histories of cinema's most controversial creations.